The Giant Spider is a true scary story about two mysterious deaths in an elevator. In a bad part of town, the police were called in to investigate a mysterious death. A man was found dead in an elevator. He was slumped against the wall and there were 2 holes in his neck. His skin was pale white and all of the blood had been drained from his body. The most puzzling thing about it was that there were no bloodstains in the elevator, no fingerprints, and no signs of forced entry. Things took another bizarre turn 1 month later, when a 13-year-old girl was found dead in the same elevator with 2 identical puncture wounds in her throat. Her body had also been sucked dry of blood. Rumors began to spread around the area that there was a vampire on the loose. The people who lived in the building were in a panic and refused to use the elevator. The police were under pressure to get to the bottom of the mysterious deaths, so they staked out the apartment. A detective and a sergeant were posted inside the elevator, riding it up and down for days. On the 3rd day, the elevator suddenly shuddered to a halt and the lights went out. The 2 men were plunged into darkness. They pulled out their flashlights and contacted their colleagues by radio to let them know they were trapped. There was a long silence. Then, they heard a strange click, click, click sound. It seemed to be coming from the roof of the elevator. Their hearts began beating fast as they realized something big was crawling around up there. That's when they noticed a hole in the roof where a panel has fallen away. The detective aimed his flashlight at the gap and had to fight back sheer terror when he saw something peering through. It was a small, hairy head the size of a fist, with 8 black, shining eyes. The sergeant was claustrophobic and also had a deathly fear of spiders. He flew into a panic and dropped his flashlight. Suddenly, the enormous spider sprang into the elevator and landed on the sergeant's face. It sank its jaws into his cheek and started sucking out his blood. The sergeant was screaming and, for a moment, the detective was paralyzed. Then, he took out his gun, aimed and fired. The first shot blew off one of the spider's hairy legs. The sergeant stopped screaming and his body collapsed to the floor. The wounded creature raced up the wall and the detective could feel its bristly hairs as it rushed past him and escaped out the hatch. When their colleagues managed to open the doors of the elevator, they found a nightmarish scene. The sergeant's corpse lay slumped against the wall and the traumatized detective was curled up in the corner. The army was called in and they destroyed the spider with a flamethrower, but then they discovered that it had laid eggs at the top of the elevator shaft. Authorities moved quickly to hush up the incident, but news leaked out in a Turkish newspaper, which claimed the giant spider was mutated by the radioactive fallout from the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster. People denied this and claimed the story was an exaggeration. Is the story true? There's no way to tell for sure, but it's something to think about if you're ever stuck in an elevator. Dolly is a scary story about a girl named Autumn who goes to school and finds that there is a new girl in her class who looks so perfect, she could almost be a doll. On her first day back at school after the summer holidays, Autumn was delighted to see all her friends again. When they filed into the classroom and took their desks, the teacher said she had an announcement to make. "Class, we have a new student this year," she said. "Her name is Dolly." Autumn looked at the new girl. She was really pretty, with long blonde hair, bright blue eyes and pale white skin. Her features were so refined that they looked almost too perfect, as if they had been carved from porcelain. The year before, Autumn had been the new girl at school and she knew how difficult that could be. It had taken her a long time to make friends, so at lunchtime, she made a point of sitting beside Dolly. She wanted to make her feel welcome and help her settle in. "Hey," she said cheerfully, "welcome to our school." Dolly looked up. "Oh, thank you," she said. Her voice was very sweet and polite. "It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" "I'm Autumn," she answered. "I was new once too. I know how it feels. You'll get used to it." "Yeah, I hope so," sighed Dolly. "I don't really know anybody yet." "Well, now you know me," smiled Autumn. "Hey, if you like, you could come over to my house after school." Sure, said Dolly, grinning from ear to ear. That sounds like fun. Over lunch, they talked about a lot of things. As it turned out, they had a lot in common. The two girls shared the same interests: clothes, hair, and makeup. Both of them also collected dolls. Autumn was actually surprised by how well they got along, and after only knowing each other for one day, she felt like they were the best of friends. Dolly was turning out to be really nice, smart, and interesting. She really was perfect, just like a doll. At the end of the day, when school had finished, Autumn waited for Dolly and the two girls walked home together. When they reached home, Dolly took one look and exclaimed, "Wow, your house is so cool." "Really?" asked Autumn, looking at the plain semi-detached. "It's just a normal house." "I bet yours is much cooler." Dolly grinned. "Definitely not," she said. The girls ran up to Autumn's bedroom and had a really fun time just talking about stuff. Autumn showed Dolly her clothes, her makeup, and her collection of dolls. Then, they went downstairs to watch TV. Not long after that, Autumn's mother arrived home from work. "Is that your sister?" asked Dolly as she walked in. "My sister?" Autumn laughed out loud. "No. That's my mom." "Really? Wow, she looks so young," exclaimed Dolly in amazement. Autumn had to go to the bathroom, so she excused herself. When she came back, she found her mother sitting in the living room, deep in conversation with Dolly. "Autumn, your friend is so interesting and talented," said her mother. "Did she show you her trick?" "What trick?" asked Autumn. "She can do ventriloquism," said her mother. "Go on, Dolly. Show her." Autumn looked at Dolly. "You're able to throw your voice?" she asked. "Yes, of course," replied Dolly. Her lips never moved. That night, as Autumn lay awake in bed, she thought about her new friend. She didn't know what it was, but something about Dolly unnerved her. Maybe it was the way she was able to speak without moving her mouth, or maybe it was how she always seemed so perfect. "I guess that's why her parents named her Dolly," she mumbled to herself. The name definitely seemed to fit her. Looking at the time, she saw that it was growing late, so she switched off the bedside lamp, rolled over, and went to sleep. Suddenly she heard a strange, high-pitched laugh. She shot up. Who was that? She was a little scared. When she didn't hear anything else, she lay back down in bed, thinking it was nothing. The next couple days Dolly came over a lot. One Saturday, Autumn went downstairs to ask her mom something. She had heard the laughing 3 nights in a row now, and she was kind of scared. When her mom saw her, she smiled. The fresh smell of bacon and eggs filled the room. "How was the sleepover?" she asked. "Oh, it was," she said sleepily. "Wait, what sleepover?" She was now more awake. Dolly sleeping over. "Was it fun?" Autumn stared at her like she was crazy. "Dolly didn't sleep over yesterday," she said. "Autumn, I saw her at the door with her bags, and I saw her go up to your room. I heard you guys at night. She even came down and talked to me for a little while when you fell asleep." "Stop messing around." Her mom looked a little more serious now. "Mom, what are you talking about? Dolly wasn't even here yesterday," she yelled. Her mom continued cooking. "Autumn, that's not funny. I've had enough of this. Go back up to your room." "But Mom," she started. "Go," she said bluntly. Later that day, Autumn leaned over to Dolly in class and whispered, "Hey, Dolly, I know this might sound strange, but did you sleep over in my house last night?" "If I slept over, don't you think you'd know about it?" whispered Dolly. "Well, the thing is, my mom said you slept over last night," said Autumn awkwardly, "but I don't. What's going on?" Forget it. I think my mom is just going senile." Dolly just smiled sweetly. The next day, Dolly was absent from school. When she didn't show up the day after that, Autumn began to think it was odd. Usually, she never missed a day of school. Something else struck Autumn as weird. Whenever Dolly's name was mentioned, One of the girls in her class, named Brianna, always seemed very nervous. Things are getting kinda weird, Autumn thought. When she walked into her room that night, she was thinking deeply, so the scream she heard scared her, except the weird thing was that the scream was hers. Sitting on her bed there was a ventriloquist's puppet. Its mouth was open and its big eyes just stared vacantly at her. She ran downstairs to tell her mom, and to see if she put it there as a joke. She ran into her mom's room, but all the lights were off. "Mom?" she asked, scared to death. "Yes," her mother replied in a hoarse voice as if she had a sore throat. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I have a little cold, that's all," she replied. "I'm scared, there's a puppet sitting on my bed." "Can I sleep with you?" she asked. "Sure," said her mom in a rough voice. Autumn almost fell asleep and had calmed down when she heard the laughing. She burst out into tears, and surprisingly her mom stayed asleep. The next day her mom wasn't there. There wasn't any note or anything. She was getting really scared. After a week of her not coming back, she decided to call the police. Dolly had come back to school and said that she was really sorry about her mom thousands of times. They looked for her mom for a long time, and a week later Dolly offered to let Autumn come to her house to make her feel better. She agreed, and after school they went for a sleepover. "What's that?" Autumn asked while Dolly was giving her a tour. She was pointing at a door. "Nothing," Dolly said sternly. "I mean," her voice got sweet again, "that's my mom's study, so, don't go in there." "Okay," Autumn said. That night, Autumn woke up and had to go to the bathroom, so she walked downstairs. "This house sure is big," she mumbled to herself. "Someone could easily get lost here." She found what she thought was the bathroom and opened the door. The second that it opened, she noticed it was Dolly's mom's study, and was about to apologize when she noticed something strange. Instead of an office, it was a staircase leading down to what looked like a basement. "Huh," she said, walking down. It was really dark and she was starting to get scared. Eventually she arrived downstairs and searched for a light switch. She found one and turned it on. The light swung back and forth, and she only got glimpses of the terror that was there. What was this? Autumn's eyes grew wide as she saw the bodies all over. Strings that you would find on puppets were on them, reaching the ceiling. Their mouths were cut like puppets too, and some of them were open, just moved down, their jaw wasn't doing anything. She could see chunks of their backs out, a place to put forehand in and make them talk. Then she saw something even worse than all of this. There was her mom in a puppet pose. She couldn't scream, this was the most horrifying thing she could imagine. She started to weep quietly, scared to death. Suddenly, she heard Dolly's voice behind her. "Didn't I tell you not to come down here? This is your mom's study?" Autumn said, crying now. "Of course not." "Look," said Dolly, and she pointed to a human puppet in a corner. This one was polished and actually looked like it was wood. "That's my mom, this is my art studio," she laughed. What? Autumn backed up and screamed when she hit a dummy. "It's not that bad," Dolly started as she walked over with some strings. "In fact, you're my next project." My sister's doppelganger. They say that if you see your doppelganger, it is a very bad omen. A doppelganger is an evil counterpart of a ghostly double, and it appears when you least expect it. The following doppelganger story are supposed to be true. This happened when I was 11 years old and my younger sister was 9. It was a Saturday afternoon and we decided to play a game of hide and seek. I looked at my watch. It was 12 p.m. I leaned against the wall, covered my eyes and started counting while my sister ran off to hide. When I counted to 100, I turned around and opened my eyes. "Ready or not, here I come," I shouted, and I started searching for my sister. As I was walking past the garage, I noticed a large box lying upside down on the floor. Peeking out from under the box, there was some blonde hair. The box even moved a little. I laughed because I had found her so easily. I ran over to the box and picked it up. There was nothing underneath. The box was empty. Puzzled, I stood there, wondering how I could have missed her. I figured I must have just imagined the blonde hair, so I continued searching. I walked around the side of the house and saw my sister just standing there in the backyard, not making any attempt to hide. She was smiling at me, but there was something strange about her, something creepy. Then she started waving at me and beckoning for me to come closer. Something about her made me afraid. That was when I noticed that she was wearing a different color t-shirt. A few minutes ago, it was blue, but now it was yellow. Despite my fears, I started walking towards her. I glanced over my shoulder, but when I back again, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. There was nothing in the backyard for her to hide behind. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. Was I seeing things? Were my eyes playing tricks on me? I stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it all. I was anxious and scared. I thought I was losing my mind. I walked around to the front of the house. There was a large maple tree standing in the middle of the garden. Looking at the tree, I noticed that there was someone standing behind it. I could just see the edge of the figure sticking out from behind the tree trunk, but I could tell they were wearing a purple t-shirt. I ran towards the tree and looked behind it, fully expecting to find my sister standing there. There was no one there. I searched all around the area, but there was no sign of her. In a panic, I ran back to the house to tell my mother that something very strange was going on. When I walked into the living room, my sister was sitting there on couch, watching TV. She was wearing a bathrobe and had a towel wrapped around her head. I gasped in disbelief and asked her where she had been. She told me that she had been hiding in the box in the garage at first, but I never came by to find her. After a long time, she got tired of waiting, so she went around to the backyard, but she couldn't find a place to hide. Then, she went around to the front and hid behind the maple tree for a while. She said she must have waited for an hour without seeing any sign of me. Eventually, she got tired and went inside. She took a shower and sat down to watch TV. I looked at my watch. It was already after 2 p.m. Somehow, 2 whole hours had gone by without me noticing at all. I have no idea what happened that day. It was as if I had stepped into some kind of time warp and somehow I had seen my sister's doppelganger. A Cry in the Night is a scary true story about a group of counselors at a summer camp who hear a voice crying out for help in the middle of the night. This is a true story, and even now, years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. When I was 19 years old, I worked as a counselor in a summer camp. It was really gorgeous, with wooden cabins and a lake, but it was in the middle of nowhere. The camp was surrounded by a dense woods. There was nothing but trees and canyons, and the closest town was over 20 miles away. One night, when everyone had turned in and was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awoken in the middle of the night. It was one of those times where you wake up and you have the feeling that something is not quite right. My heart was racing for no apparent reason. I just lay there quietly, listening intently. The whole cabin was wooden, with fly screens over the windows, so I could hear the sound of crickets and the breeze blowing through the trees. That's when I heard it, a very faint cry for help. It sounded like it was coming from the woods. It was the cry of a young girl lost somewhere out in the woods. I quickly got out of bed and woke my roommate, who was another counselor. I told him to listen, and when the cry came again, we both heard it. We quickly got dressed, grabbed our flashlights and hurried outside in the direction the sound was coming from. It was intermittent, but I could clearly hear the girl's voice saying "help" or "I'm lost" quite regularly, and quite a way into the woods. She sounded like she was in a lot of distress. The quicker we found her the better, so we could get her back to camp safely. It was dark as hell that night, and all we had to light our way were 2 puny flashlights. The girl was out there in the pitch black with no way of seeing anything at all. The boys' cabins were on one side of the lake and the girls were on the other. On the way, we ran into a female counselor. She had heard the cries too from her side of camp. All three of us headed into the woods together, shining our torches left and right and calling out to the lost girl. We were reluctant to go too far into the woods because we didn't want to get lost in the darkness. Whenever we called out to the girl and heard her respond, it sounded like she was quite far in. After walking for about 5 minutes, we could hear her crying and sniffling, so we knew we were close. It sounded like she was only a few feet away and we could hear her saying, "I'm scared. Where am I?" in a low voice. We kept trying to reassure her, and just when we felt we were right beside her, she suddenly went silent. "We're here. Where are you?" we called out, but there was no answer. Then, in the distance, we heard her voice again, crying, "Help me. I'm lost. Come quick." We started toward the sound of her cries, and just when we felt that we were right on top of her again, she went silent. We called out to her. We waited for her reply. Nothing. Then, from even farther away, we heard her voice again, "Help. Why can't you help me?" Something didn't feel right. We all looked at each other and without a word, we decided to head back to camp. We called out to the girl and told her we were going to get help and we would come back with a search party. We could still hear faint whimpers and crying sounds from her, so we told her to sit tight and we would be back soon. The three of us sprinted back to camp and rang the big bell at the main office to alert the whole camp that there was an emergency. The camp manager switched on the floodlights and we all met in the quad for a roll call and a head count. They started by calling the names of the counselors. We were all present. Then, they called the names of the campers. All of the kids were present. Nobody was missing. They went through the roll twice and 3 times. Every single person that was meant to be at the camp was checked off and present. But what about the voice of the girl? The camp manager and the other counselors thought it was a false alarm and said that what we had heard must have been just the echoes of our own voices. They dismissed everyone and sent us back to bed. The three of us knew what we had heard, and it wasn't an echo. It was creepy as hell. The voice kept leading us into the woods, further and further. Someone or something was luring us deeper into the woods, and to this day, I have no idea what it intended to do to us. This was by far the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. Myself and the female counselor believed it was something paranormal, but neither of us could explain it. The counselor, who was my roommate, refused to talk about it, and whenever we brought it up, he would say it was just voices echoing, but when I looked in his eyes, I could see that he was scared to death. He just wanted to convince himself it didn't happen.